We're inviting in the horrors
that lurk beyond and plunging the world into a maelstrom of madness.
That's right. It's PowerCore, Call of Cthulhu from Board and Dice. In this Living Rules two-player battle of eternal horror inspired by the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, opponents each compete as an alliance of two nightmarish beings of the Cthulhu Mythos. Cards rotate their power cores to generate horror, powering abilities and summoning terrible avatars or loyal servants with limited sanity. One player wins by reducing their opponent's total life to 0, or when their opponent goes to draw a card from an empty deck. Let's get into it with game setup. Players sit at the table opposite each other with a player mat in front of each. Create a supply of shield, wound, and horror tokens within everyone's reach, and give each player a set of 12 common power cores, separated by their blue or yellow backing. Next, separate the cards into their character decks. In case you bumped into a demon on your way to play and all the decks are jumbled, you can tell them apart by the symbol in their bottom right. Each player selects 2 different character decks. I'm choosing Cthulhu and Nyarlathotep. Set aside the character cards, the ones with card slots listed on them, and any avatar cards from each deck. Then shuffle the remaining cards together to form a single magnificent draw deck. Then place it on the card deck area on the bottom right of the player mat. Leave room for a discard right next to it. Players place their 2 character cards to the left side of their playmat in their character area in whichever order they choose. Later, we'll get into gameplay and characters will activate from left to right. Add together the numbers in the top right of each character card. If a character area ever sustains a number of wounds equal to this number, that player loses the game. Place avatars in the avatar area at the bottom of the playmat. The order is not important right now. Next, place each character-specific power core face up on that character, choosing its orientation and binding it to the card. Place the avatar power cores on their respective avatars, but place these power cores face down because they won't begin the game in play yet. Players can choose their power core orientation later when they enter play. Place the 12 generic power cores in a pile on the left side of the player mat. Create a power core offer by drawing the top 3 power cores and placing them face up in the allotted spots next to the stack. Players can choose from these 3 options when cards enter play. During gameplay, cards will be played to the battlefield on the top right of the player mat, but we'll get into all that in just a bit. Next, randomly determine a starting player, and you are ready to play. Gameplay begins with each player drawing up a starting hand of 4 cards. Each player may choose to mulligan their hand once by setting aside any number of cards and drawing up an equal number from their deck, then shuffling the mulliganed cards back into their draw deck. For serious players, the starting player must technically declare whether they will mulligan before their opponent makes a decision. A game is played over a series of turns, each made up of 5 steps. Start of turn step, power core step, action step, draw step, end of turn step. Then play passes to the opponent. In the start of turn step, resolve any effects in play that say at the start of your turn or at the start of the enemy's turn. The active player will always resolve their card effects before their opponents. Then, in the power core step, rotate all power cores in the character area and battlefield 90 degrees to the right, beginning with the leftmost character and moving to the rightmost card. The side facing the top becomes the active space, indicating the resources and effects the player will generate. There are 2 types of power cores. There are regular power cores, which can be bound to items, abilities, and allies that are not avatars. They have a starting space with a green background and a final space with a red background. After the final space is resolved, the power core and its card are both discarded. Special power cores, like the ones on characters and avatars, have no starting space. Players choose their orientation when they enter play, and they don't have a final space, so they don't get discarded in the same way. The resources that can be generated from power cores include damage, shield, healing, horror, and flair. Damage must be dealt to a single target, an ally, avatar, or a character area. Damage is marked by placing wound tokens onto that target. If the damage dealt is equal to or greater than the target's life total, the target is eliminated. Eliminated allies go to their discard pile. Eliminated avatars are removed from the game. If the target had shields, they may be discarded 1-for-1 to negate damage. Shields, when generated, must also be placed on a single target of an ally, avatar, or character area. Each target has a maximum of 4 shield tokens. Healing removes wound tokens from a single target 1-for-1. If the target has no wounds, the healing has no effect. Horror is stored in a player's character area with no max limit and can be spent to meet the requirements of certain game effects. Flair, this icon, allows a player to activate an effect with the same icon by following the text on that card. Flair can only be spent if the card that generated it has a flair effect, otherwise it's ignored. After each PowerCore's active space has been resolved one at a time, check to see if any of them were a final space marked in red. If so, discard the PowerCore and the card it was on. The active player performs 2 actions, resolving one completely before moving on. They may be taken in any order and may be different or the same action repeated. Options include draw a card, play a card, or rotate a PowerCore. Each PowerCore can only be rotated once per action step. Draw a card. This one's pretty easy and there's no hand limit during this step. Play a card. Play 1 card from your hand, but be mindful of your battlefield card slot limit. The limit of cards a player may play to their battlefield is whatever slots are listed on each character card plus 1. In this example, the slot limit is 3. Maneuver cards are the exception. They don't have a PowerCore slot or take up room on the battlefield because they are immediately resolved for a one-time effect. When you play a card onto the battlefield, you must play it to the right of any previously played cards, no rearranging, and bind it with a PowerCore by selecting one of the 3 face-up PowerCores from the offer, placing it on that card's PowerCore slot with the empty green space on top. Then immediately replenish the missing offer. If this stack is ever empty, shuffle the discard to create a new draw pile. Once per turn, a player may pay 1 horror to replenish the entire offer. Cards might require horror to be spent in order to play them. If so, players discard that number of horror from their character area back to the supply. Cards might also require the player to use an action to play it. Additionally, cards can give a player even more actions that must be spent on the current turn and don't carry over. The final option is to rotate a PowerCore in either the character area or the battlefield and take the resources generated. And remember, you can only do this once per PowerCore in the same action step. Next up, the draw step. The active player draws 1 card from their draw deck and puts it into their hand. If they ever go to draw a card and cannot, remember, they will lose. Then check to see if the player exceeds their hand limit of 5. If so, discard down to 5. Finally, the end of turn step. Do the things that say end of turn. I bet you want to dissect a card's anatomy, don't you? We'll start with a character card. Each of them has a name, a life value, a card slot modifier, a PowerCore slot, and its own special rules. Ally cards have the ally symbol, life value, denoting how many wounds they can sustain before being eliminated, PowerCore bonuses. These modify the resources generated in the PowerCore step, but do not generate any resources on their own. They only augment the ones already being generated. Avatars. Note the avatar keyword, avatar symbol, and life value. These cards work a little differently. In addition to having their own special PowerCore, they're played onto the battlefield by using the ability text on the character it's representing, or another card effect. Only 1 avatar that is corresponding to each character card can be in play at a time. If an avatar leaves play, another avatar of that character may now enter. When an avatar is destroyed by wounds, or unmade by performing its unmake action, it is removed from the game entirely and may not return. Unmaking is a free action. Ability and item cards are played similarly to ally cards, except they don't have life totals, so they can't be eliminated with damage. Maneuver cards are those one-time effect cards that are discarded after being played. Just a couple more things to note. Some cards have keywords. Reference these in the rulebook. For example, taunt. When an ally has taunt, it's the only card that can take damage until it's eliminated. Show this by sliding taunt cards forward on the battlefield. If an opponent has multiple taunt cards out, the active player may choose which of them to deal damage to. If an effect says to take wounds, they go to the character area and cannot be negated by shields or other damage mitigating effects. Players continue taking turns, dealing wounds, and summoning allies until one player must draw a card and their deck is empty, or the number of wound tokens in their character area equals or exceeds their character's combined life total. In either case, their opponent wins. And that's all you need to know to get started playing PowerCore Call of Cthulhu. And remember, this is a living rules game, and the text on the card always takes precedence over the rules printed in a rulebook. So my main advice? Read the dang card. I'm Becca Scott, you're watching Good Time Society, and if you don't want to live in fear of nightmarish avatars coming after you, well, you better hit that like button and subscribe to the channel.
Or else.
And then come on back for more great games and good times. We'll see you later.